The message arrived on a Tuesday morning when Admiral Kate Morrison was drinking her third cup of coffee and reviewing patrol reports from the Outer Rim stations. The communication array at Sol Defense Command started screaming alerts that made every technician in the facility drop what they were doing and stare at their screens with wide eyes. The signal was coming from beyond the heliopause, and it was broadcasting on every frequency known to human science, plus a few that their equipment had never detected before. Lieutenant Danny Walsh was the first to decode the transmission, and his hands shook as he printed out the translation. He walked across the command center floor like a man carrying his own death sentence and placed the paper on Admiral Morrison's desk without saying a word. Morrison looked at the young officer's pale face and knew before she read the first line that everything was about to change. The message was simple and direct in the way that ultimatums always are. The Galactic Council demanded that humanity surrender all military assets and submit to what they called galactic integration within 72 hours or face complete annihilation. The transmission included detailed scans of Earth's defenses and population centers, along with tactical assessments that showed the aliens knew exactly how to destroy human civilization down to the last orbital platform. Morrison read the message twice before calling President Amanda Brooks on the secure line. The president listened without interruption as Morrison explained what they were facing, and when she finished, there was silence on the line for nearly a minute. When Brooks finally spoke, her voice was steady, but Morrison could hear the weight of 8 billion lives in every word. The aliens had identified themselves as a coalition of 12 species led by the Vorthak Empire, and their war fleets were already moving towards Sol System. The transmission included visual records of their armada, and Morrison felt her stomach drop as she watched the footage. Thousands of ships stretched across space like a metal storm with vessels ranging from sleek destroyers to massive dreadnoughts that could crack planets in half. Captain Jake Sullivan was in the shower aboard the UES Defiance when the priority alert came through his personal communicator. He grabbed a towel and was reading the message before his feet hit the deck plating. And by the time he reached the bridge, he was already formulating plans that he hoped he would never have to use. The Defiance was humanity's newest and most advanced warship, but looking at the alien fleet specifications, he knew that conventional tactics would be suicide. The crew assembled in the main briefing room within an hour, and Sullivan could see the same mixture of fear and determination on every face. Chief Engineer Patricia Bell sat in the front row next to Dr. Lisa Carter, who had been working on classified projects that most of the crew didn't even know existed. Weapons Officer Commander Sarah Martinez checked her tablet for the 5th time, while Navigation Officer Lieutenant Commander Ryan Fox stared at the star charts, like they might reveal some hidden escape route. Sullivan stood at the front of the room and told them exactly what they were facing without sugarcoating anything. The alien coalition had enough firepower to turn Earth into molten slag, and their technology was centuries ahead of anything in the human arsenal. Traditional warfare would be over before it started, and Earth's population would be dead or enslaved within days. But there was another option, and Sullivan paused before explaining it because he knew how insane it would sound. Earth's government had decided to respond to the ultimatum by sending exactly one ship to meet the alien armada at the neutral zone near Alpha Centauri. That ship would be the Defiance, and their mission would be to deliver humanity's answer to the Galactic Coalition. The room erupted in confused voices as crew members tried to understand how sending one ship against thousands could be anything other than elaborate suicide. Martinez stood up and asked the question that everyone was thinking about, whether this was some kind of negotiation tactic or if command had simply lost their minds. Sullivan held up his hand for silence and told them that Dr. Carter would explain what made their mission possible. Dr. Carter walked to the front of the room carrying a tablet that displayed technical specifications that looked like they belonged in a science fiction novel rather than a military briefing. She explained that the Defiance had been equipped with experimental technology that most of the scientific community believed was impossible. The ship's quantum resonance field could manipulate local space-time in ways that conventional physics said should not work. The technology was based on artifacts that had been discovered in Earth's deepest ocean trenches 5 years earlier. The artifacts were clearly artificial, but they predated human civilization by millions of years, and their construction materials did not match anything in the periodic table. Research teams had spent years trying to understand how they worked, before realizing that the artifacts responded to human neural patterns in ways that alien technology could not replicate. Carter explained that the quantum field around the Defiance would make conventional weapons ineffective while allowing their own systems to operate under different physical laws. The ship's primary weapon systems had been completely redesigned to take advantage of quantum mechanics that most species in the galaxy had never encountered. Instead of firing energy beams or kinetic projectiles, the Defiance could manipulate matter and energy at the subatomic level. Sullivan watched his crew absorb this information and saw the moment when fear began to transform into something else. They were still facing impossible odds, but now those odds came with the possibility of achieving something that no one in the galaxy would expect. The aliens thought they were dealing with a primitive species that barely understood faster than light travel, but humanity had discovered something that changed the rules of engagement entirely. The briefing lasted 3 more hours, as Carter explained how the quantum systems worked, and Martinez ran through targeting protocols that sounded more like theoretical physics than military tactics. Bell reviewed the power distribution systems that would keep the quantum field stable, while Fox calculated hyperspace jump coordinates that would bring them face to face with the largest military force ever assembled in known space. When the meeting ended, Sullivan stood alone in the briefing room looking at the tactical displays that showed the alien fleet's projected positions. In 6 hours, the Defiance would jump to hyperspace and begin a journey that would end with either humanity's greatest victory or its final defeat. The galaxy wondered why Earth would send one ship against an armada, but Sullivan knew that sometimes one ship was exactly what the situation required. Admiral Morrison watched the Defiance disappear into hyperspace from the observation deck at Sol Command and felt the weight of humanity's future pressing down on her shoulders. Every person on Earth was counting on Captain Sullivan and his crew to deliver a message that would either save their species or at least ensure that their final stand would be remembered. The aliens expected either surrender or token resistance. But they were about to discover that humanity had a third option that no one in the galaxy had ever considered before. The Defiance dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Alpha Centauri system, and Captain Sullivan felt his breath catch in his throat as the alien armada resolved on the main screen. The intelligence reports had not done justice to the sheer scale of what they were facing, and for a moment he wondered if even their quantum technology would be enough against such overwhelming force. 3,000 ships stretched across space in perfect formation, with the massive Vorthak dreadnoughts anchoring defensive positions, while smaller vessels filled the gaps between them like deadly insects swarming around their queens. The alien, Fleet had positioned itself in a sphere formation that could concentrate fire from every direction, and Sullivan realized that conventional tactics would have resulted in the Defiance being vaporized before it could fire a single shot. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Fox ran passive scans while keeping their own emissions to minimum, and reported that the alien ships were broadcasting on multiple frequencies with what appeared to be celebration messages. The coalition forces clearly believed that humanity had sent the Defiance to deliver Earth's surrender, and their communications included discussions about how to divide human territory and population among the various species. Dr. Lisa Carter worked at her station making final adjustments to the quantum resonance field while monitoring the ancient artifacts that formed the core of their weapons systems. The artifacts had been humming with increased activity since they arrived in the system, and Carter suspected that they were responding to the presence of so many alien vessels in ways that their research had not predicted. Commander Sarah Martinez ran through weapons diagnostics for the third time and reported that all quantum cannon arrays were operating within normal parameters. The weapons looked like conventional particle beam projectors from the outside, but their internal mechanisms operated on principles that violated several laws of physics that the galactic community considered absolute. Instead of accelerating particles to near light speed, the quantum cannons manipulated probability waves to convince reality that targets should cease existing in their current form. Chief Engineer Patricia Bell monitored power distribution from the main reactor while keeping one eye on the quantum field generators that surrounded the ship's hull. The field was invisible to both human and alien sensors, but Bell could feel its presence through the ship's systems, like a low-frequency vibration that seemed to resonate in her bones. The field would protect them from conventional weapons while allowing their own systems to operate under the altered physics that made their mission possible. Sullivan opened a communication channel to the alien fleet and within seconds found himself face-to-face with War Marshal Thesek of the Vorthak Empire. The alien commander appeared on the main screen as a towering reptilian figure with scales that shifted color according to his emotional state and eyes that held the cold intelligence of a species that had conquered half the galaxy through superior firepower and ruthless efficiency. Thesek spoke in accented but clear English, and his voice carried the authority of someone who had never experienced defeat in 3 decades of military service. He demanded to know if the single human vessel carried Earth's formal surrender, and warned that any other response would result in the immediate destruction of the Defiance, followed by the systematic annihilation of every human settlement in known space. Sullivan responded with calm professionalism that seemed to irritate the Vorthak commander, who clearly expected either groveling submission or desperate bravado from the primitive species that dared to challenge galactic authority. The human Captain explained that Earth had indeed sent their answer to the ultimatum, but that the aliens might not understand the message until it was delivered in full. Other alien commanders joined the communication link, and Sullivan found himself facing a conference of species that represented the most powerful military force in galactic history. Admiral Zakth of the insectoid Cruller swarm clicked his mandibles in what might have been amusement, while Fleet Commander Vexhai of the Crystalline Resonance Collective pulsed with light patterns that indicated confident superiority. The alien commanders began discussing among themselves whether the humans were attempting some kind of psychological warfare or if they were simply too primitive to understand the hopelessness of their situation. Thesek grew impatient with what he perceived as stalling tactics and issued a final ultimatum demanding that the Defiance transmit Earth surrender within 5 minutes or face immediate destruction. Sullivan used those 5 minutes to make final preparations, while his crew worked with the focused intensity of people who knew that everything depended on the next few moments. Carter activated the quantum field at full power and reported that the artifacts were responding to her commands with an enthusiasm that suggested they had been waiting millions of years for this exact moment. Martinez charged the quantum cannon arrays while Fox positioned the ship to take advantage of the alien fleet's formation, which had been designed to contain conventional vessels rather than something that operated outside normal spacetime. Bell routed additional power to the field generators while monitoring stress readings that showed the ship's hull was adapting to forces that should have torn it apart at the molecular level. The 5-minute deadline passed, and Thesek snarled. An order that sent weapons fire from a dozen alien vessels converging on the Defiance's position. Energy beams that could melt through planetary crusts struck the quantum field and simply disappeared into pocket dimensions that existed outside normal space, while kinetic projectiles slowed to a crawl and drifted away like leaves on an impossible wind. Sullivan watched the alien weapons fire splash harmlessly against their defenses and knew that the real battle was about to begin. The quantum field had protected them from the initial attack, but now they had to demonstrate that humanity's response to the galactic ultimatum involved more than just superior defensive technology. Carter reported that the quantum cannons were ready, and that the artifacts were providing targeting data that seemed to anticipate the alien fleet's movements before their commanders had even issued orders. The ancient technology had been designed by a human civilization that transcended normal physics and left behind weapons that only their descendants could properly operate. Martinez requested permission to engage, and Sullivan gave the order that would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. The Defiance's quantum cannons fired for the first time in actual combat, and reality itself seemed to bend around. The invisible beams that reached out toward the alien armada with the patience of mathematics and the inevitability of entropy. The first alien ships to disappear were a squadron of crawler destroyers that had been positioned at the front of the formation to provide screening fire for the larger vessels. The quantum beams struck their hulls and convinced the atoms that composed their armor plating that they would prefer to exist in a different dimensional framework where the laws of physics operated according to human expectations rather than galactic standards. Thesek roared orders across the communication channels as his fleet tried to comprehend what had just happened to ships that had been there one moment and were simply gone the next, without any debris or energy signatures to indicate how they had been destroyed. The War Marshal demanded explanations that his tactical officers could not provide because their sensors showed no indication that the human vessel had fired any weapons at all. The alien fleet erupted into chaos as more ships began disappearing under the Defiance's quantum assault, and their commanders struggled to understand how their overwhelming numerical advantage had become meaningless against weapons that operated outside the boundaries of known science. War Marshal Thesek screamed orders across multiple communication channels, while his tactical officers reported sensor readings that made no sense according to any physics they understood. Captain Sullivan watched the tactical display as red icons, representing enemy vessels, simply vanished from the screen without leaving any trace of wreckage or energy signatures that would indicate conventional weapons fire. Dr. Carter's quantum cannons were rewriting local space-time to convince matter that it preferred to exist in probability states that did not include being part of an alien warship trying to destroy humanity. Commander Sarah Martinez worked her targeting console with the focused precision of someone who had trained for years with theoretical weapons that most military experts believed could never actually function. The quantum targeting system provided firing solutions that anticipated enemy movements before their own commanders had decided what orders to give, and Martinez found herself destroying ships that were still in the process of changing course to avoid attacks that had not yet been fired. a wing of Vorthak heavy cruisers attempted to flank the Defiance by using their superior speed to attack from multiple vectors simultaneously, but the quantum field around the human ship extended its influence to trap them in a pocket of space where only Earth's physics applied. The alien vessels found their engines producing thrust in directions that their navigation computers insisted were mathematically impossible, while their weapons fired projectiles that aged into dust before traveling more than a few meters. Admiral Zakth of the Kruller Swarm tried to coordinate a massed assault using his insectoid fleet's natural swarming tactics, but discovered that the quantum field disrupted the neural links that allowed his ships to operate as a unified organism. Individual Kruller vessels began firing on each other as their shared consciousness fragmented under the influence of physics that had evolved uniquely on Earth and could not be comprehended by minds that developed under different universal constants. Fleet Commander Vex High ordered his crystalline vessels to establish harmonic resonance patterns that should have shattered any known hull material, but the Defiance absorbed the sonic attack and converted it into additional power for the quantum field generators. Chief Engineer Patricia Bell reported that the alien harmonics were actually improving their system efficiency by providing a natural tuning frequency that synchronized perfectly with the ancient artifacts that controlled their weapons. Dr. Carter monitored the artifacts with growing amazement as they displayed capabilities that her research team had never suspected during 5 years of intensive study. The ancient devices were not just weapons, but sophisticated reality manipulation tools that had been designed by a human civilization that transcended normal space-time millions of years before their descendants developed written language. The artifacts responded to human neural patterns in ways that seemed almost eager, as if they had been waiting eons for their creators' children to finally discover them and use them for their intended purpose. Carter realized that Earth's early civilization had not disappeared but had evolved beyond physical existence while leaving behind technology that only their genetic descendants could properly interface with. Sullivan ordered a concentrated barrage against the alien fleet's command vessels and watched as quantum beams reached across space to convince the molecular bonds holding enemy dreadnoughts together that they would prefer to reorganize themselves into harmless clouds of component atoms. The massive Vorthak flagship began to collapse in on itself as its hull plating decided to exist in a different dimensional framework where it was not currently being used to support a genocidal war against humanity. Thessek's final transmission was a mixture of rage and disbelief as his own ship began to phase in and out of normal space while the quantum field extended its influence to encompass more of the alien armada. The War Marshal demanded to know what kind of weapons humanity was using and how they had developed technology that violated every known law of physics that governed interstellar warfare. Sullivan responded that humanity had not developed the technology, but had inherited it from ancestors who understood that the universe was far stranger and more malleable than most species realized. The quantum weapons were not human inventions, but human birthright left behind by a civilization that had learned to manipulate reality itself rather than simply exist within its constraints. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Fox reported that the alien fleet was beginning to break formation as individual commanders realized that their conventional tactics were not just ineffective, but were actually making them more vulnerable to weapons that targeted the fundamental assumptions underlying their technology. Ships that tried to maneuver were caught in probability loops that left them occupying multiple positions simultaneously, while vessels that remained stationary found themselves aging centuries in seconds. The quantum field continued to expand. As the artifacts drew power from the alien fleet's own weapons fire and converted enemy attacks into additional reality manipulation capacity, Every energy beam that struck the Defiance strengthened the field, while every kinetic projectile provided mass that could be redistributed according to quantum mechanical principles that treated conservation of energy as a polite suggestion rather than an absolute law. Martinez targeted the alien fleet's ammunition supplies and convinced the explosive compounds stored in their magazines that they would prefer to detonate according to human chemistry rather than the chemical principles that governed their creation. Secondary explosions rippled through the enemy formation as ships that had survived the quantum cannon attacks destroyed themselves when their own weapons decided to operate under Earth physics. Carter reported that the artifacts were providing tactical data that seemed to come from outside normal time, as if they were accessing information about the battle from temporal coordinates that had not yet occurred. The ancient devices knew which ships would attempt to retreat and which commanders would order desperate final attacks before those decisions had been made by the aliens themselves. The remaining alien vessels found themselves trapped in a region of space where human expectations about how reality should function had become more important than the universal constants that had governed their technology for millions of years. Weapons that had conquered dozens of species became useless toys, while ships that had traveled between stars found themselves unable to maintain coherent molecular structure. Admiral Zaketh's desperate final gambit involved ramming his remaining vessels directly into the Defiance, but the quantum field convinced his ships that they were actually moving away from the human vessel at increasing velocity, while their instruments continued to show them on a collision course. The insectoid commander died believing that he had succeeded in destroying humanity's champion, while his fleet scattered itself across multiple dimensions. Sullivan realized that the battle was effectively over when the last functional alien vessel began broadcasting surrender signals on all frequencies, while its crew begged for mercy from weapons they could not understand, wielded by a species they had fatally underestimated. The galaxy had wondered why humanity sent one ship to face an armada, and now they understood that one ship was all that had been necessary to demonstrate that Earth operated according to rules that the rest of the universe was still learning. The silence that followed the destruction of the alien armada felt heavier than the battle itself, as Captain Sullivan surveyed the tactical display that showed scattered debris where 3,000 warships had existed minutes earlier. The quantum field around the Defiance continued to pulse with residual energy, while the ancient artifacts hummed with satisfaction at having finally fulfilled their original purpose after millions of years of patient waiting. Dr. Carter studied the readings from her instruments and realized that the battle had revealed capabilities in the artifacts that her research team had never suspected during years of careful analysis. The ancient devices had not simply provided weapons, but had fundamentally altered the local space-time continuum to create a region where human understanding of physics took precedence over the universal constants that governed the rest of the galaxy. The few surviving alien vessels drifted helplessly in the quantum field's influence, while their crews struggled to comprehend what had happened to their mighty armada. Commander Sarah Martinez monitored their communications and reported that most of the remaining ships were broadcasting surrender signals mixed with desperate requests for explanation about how humanity had developed technology that seemed to violate every known law of science. Sullivan made a decision that surprised his own crew when he ordered the quantum cannons to power down and opened communication channels to the surviving alien commanders. Instead of completing the destruction of the enemy fleet, he chose to demonstrate the mercy that had always been humanity's greatest strength, even when facing species that had come to destroy everything he cared about. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Fox established contact with the remaining Vorthak vessels, and Sullivan found himself speaking to Captain Crescitar, whose scales had turned the pale gray that indicated shock and defeat among his species. The alien officer's voice shook as he asked how humanity had acquired weapons that could unmake matter itself, and whether Earth intended to use such power to conquer the galaxy as the Vorthak Empire had done. Sullivan explained that humanity had not conquered anything, but had simply refused to be conquered by others, and that the quantum technology was not a tool for domination, but a means of ensuring that Earth would never again face extinction at the hands of species who believed that superior firepower granted them the right to destroy civilizations that refused to submit. Chief Engineer Patricia Bell worked to contain the quantum field's expansion as the artifacts continued to draw energy from the destroyed alien vessels and convert it into reality manipulation capacity that threatened to spread across the entire star system. The ancient devices seemed reluctant to return to dormancy after experiencing actual combat for the first time in eons. Dr. Carter discovered that the artifacts were broadcasting some kind of signal toward Earth, and she realized that the battle had activated a network of similar devices that had been hidden across human space for millions of years. The quantum resonance was spreading to other artifacts buried in Earth's ocean trenches and scattered across the outer planets where human exploration teams had been finding them without understanding their true significance. The implications were staggering because it meant that humanity's ancestors had not simply developed advanced technology before disappearing, but had prepared their descendants for exactly this kind of conflict by seeding weapons throughout the solar system that would activate when Earth faced existential threat from alien invasion. Sullivan ordered the ship's communication array to begin broadcasting on all galactic frequencies, and within minutes his message was being received by every inhabited world and space station within 50 light years. The transmission included full tactical recordings of the battle along with humanity's formal response to the Galactic Council's ultimatum. The message was simple and direct, in the way that statements of fact always are. Earth did not seek conflict with other species, but would not tolerate attempts at conquest or forced integration into galactic society. Humanity offered trade and diplomatic relations with any species that approached them as equals, but warned that any future threats would be met with the same response that had just destroyed the Coalition Armada. Fox reported that the quantum transmission was being received and retransmitted across the galaxy at faster than light speeds, as the artifact's network amplified the signal through dimensions that conventional physics insisted should not exist. Within hours, every major civilization would know that humanity possessed technology that made their own weapons obsolete. The surviving alien crews requested permission to retrieve their dead and salvage what remained of their fleets before returning to their homeworlds with news of what they had witnessed. Sullivan granted their requests and watched as the broken remnants of the galaxy's greatest military force began the long journey home to spread word of humanity's unexpected capabilities. Martinez monitored long-range sensors as the alien vessels limped away from the battlefield and reported that several of them were already broadcasting warnings to their governments about the futility of any future military action against Earth. The quantum weapons had not just defeated the Coalition fleet, but had shattered the psychological foundations that supported galactic military thinking. Carter continued her analysis of the artifacts and discovered that they contained detailed, technical specifications for additional quantum technologies that could revolutionize everything from space travel to planetary engineering. The ancient human civilization had left behind blueprints for devices that could manipulate matter and energy on scales that would make terraforming as simple as changing the settings on a control panel. Bell reported that the quantum field was finally stabilizing as the artifacts accepted her commands to reduce their output to sustainable levels. The ancient devices seemed to understand that the immediate threat had passed and that maintaining reality manipulation effects across an entire star system was unnecessary now that Earth's message had been delivered. Sullivan realized that the battle had changed more than just humanity's relationship with the galactic community because the artifact's activation had revealed capabilities that would transform human civilization itself. The quantum technology could provide unlimited clean energy while making interstellar travel as easy as stepping from one room to another. The Defiance began its journey back to Earth carrying news that would reshape not just human space, but the entire galaxy as other species struggled to adapt to the reality that their assumptions about physics and military superiority had been fundamentally wrong. The coalition had come to force humanity into submission, but had instead discovered that some species could not be conquered because they operated according to rules that transcended conventional understanding. As the ship jumped into hyperspace, Sullivan stood on the bridge looking at stars that seemed different now that humanity had demonstrated its true place in the galactic order. The artifacts hummed quietly in their containment chambers, while the quantum field generators maintained the low-level reality distortion that would protect Earth from any future threats that might arise from species who refused to accept the new balance of power. The galaxy had wondered why humanity sent one ship to face an armada, and now they understood that the question had revealed their own fundamental misunderstanding about what made a species truly dangerous in a universe where the laws of physics were more flexible than most civilizations had ever imagined. 6 months after the Battle of Alpha Centauri, the galaxy had settled into an uneasy new equilibrium where humanity occupied a position that no species had held in recorded history. Captain Jake Sullivan stood on the bridge of the UES Revolution, watching construction crews put finishing touches on the 12th quantum-enhanced warship to roll out of Earth's orbital shipyards since the artifacts had revealed their secrets to human engineers. Admiral Kate Morrison had promoted Sullivan to Fleet Admiral after his return from the most important military engagement in human history, and now he commanded a small but impossibly powerful fleet that served as both Earth's defense force and a constant reminder to the galactic community that humanity could not be threatened with conventional weapons or traditional military thinking. Dr. Lisa Carter had been appointed Director of Quantum Research, and her teams worked around the clock to unlock additional capabilities hidden within the ancient artifacts that continued to reveal new secrets as human understanding of their technology advanced. The devices had been designed by a civilization that transcended normal physics, and they contained blueprints for technologies that could reshape reality on planetary scales. The Galactic Council had reformed under new leadership after the Vorthak Empire collapsed, and half their member species withdrew from military alliances that had proven useless against quantum weapons. Ambassador Helen Price led humanity's first official diplomatic mission to the galactic capital, where former enemies now competed to offer favorable trade agreements and non-aggression pacts. President Amanda Brooks had authorized the construction of quantum-enhanced exploration vessels that could travel between dimensions as easily as conventional ships moved between star systems, and human survey teams were mapping regions of space that had been considered unreachable by species limited to normal physics. The artifacts had revealed that the universe was far larger and stranger than anyone had imagined. Chief Engineer Patricia Bell supervised the installation of quantum field generators on civilian ships and space stations while working to develop safety protocols for technology that could accidentally erase entire moons if improperly calibrated. The ancient artifacts responded enthusiastically to human commands, but their power required careful management to avoid unintended reality manipulation effects. Commander Sarah Martinez had been assigned to train the next generation of quantum weapons officers, and she found herself teaching targeting techniques that resembled theoretical mathematics more than traditional military tactics. The quantum cannons could convince enemy vessels to cease existing, but they could also reshape matter into forms that served constructive rather than destructive purposes. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Fox led exploration missions into parallel dimensions, where the laws of physics operated according to different principles, and his reports described universes where time moved backward and space folded in on itself like origami constructed from pure mathematics. The quantum drives allowed human ships to visit realities where their ancestors had evolved along different technological paths. The Vorthak Empire had fragmented into dozens of smaller states as their subject species declared independence and established governments based on principles of cooperation rather than conquest. Former War Marshal Thesek faced trial for crimes against sapient species, while his people struggled to adapt to a galaxy where military superiority no longer guaranteed political dominance. Admiral Zakth of the Kruller Swarm had committed ritual suicide after reporting his defeat to the Hive Queens, and his species had withdrawn from galactic politics entirely while they tried to understand how their collective consciousness had been shattered by exposure to human quantum fields. The insectoid race now viewed humanity with a mixture of terror and religious awe. The Crystalline Resonance Collective had petitioned Earth for permission to study quantum artifacts in exchange for access to their advanced harmonic technologies, and their scientists worked alongside human researchers to develop new applications for reality manipulation that could benefit both species. The cooperation represented the first truly equal partnership between humanity and an established galactic civilization. Fleet Admiral Sullivan reviewed intelligence reports from across known space and noted that several previously unknown species had emerged from hiding to make contact with Earth after learning that humanity possessed weapons that could protect smaller civilizations from conquest by aggressive empires. The quantum technology had shifted the balance of power towards species that preferred diplomacy over warfare. Dr. Carter's latest breakthrough involved artifacts that could manipulate time itself, and her preliminary experiments suggested that human civilization might be able to communicate with their vanished ancestors who had transcended physical existence millions of years earlier. The ancient devices were not just weapons and tools, but components of a vast network that connected different periods of human development across cosmic history. Bell reported that quantum field technology was revolutionizing life on Earth as civilian applications provided unlimited clean energy while making poverty and resource scarcity obsolete. The artifacts could convert matter into any configuration that human imagination could conceive, and early terraforming projects had transformed barren asteroids into garden worlds within weeks. Martinez tested experimental quantum weapons that could disable enemy vessels without destroying them, and her teams developed non-lethal applications that could end conflicts by convincing aggressive species that violence was less appealing than cooperation. The technology offered alternatives to traditional warfare that most galactic civilizations had never considered possible. Fox submitted reports from expeditions that had discovered the ruins of the ancient human civilization in dimensions where time moved at different rates, and his archaeological teams were beginning to piece together the history of Earth's transcended ancestors. The vanished humans had not died but had evolved beyond physical form while maintaining concern for their biological descendants. Sullivan realized that humanity's victory at Alpha Centauri had been just the beginning of a transformation that would affect every species in the galaxy, as the old order based on military dominance gave way to new possibilities that the quantum artifacts made available. The universe was revealing itself to be far more malleable than anyone had suspected. The Revolution's quantum sensors detected incoming signals from the edge of the galaxy, where human exploration fleets had made contact with civilizations that existed partially outside normal space-time and communicated through mathematics rather than conventional language. These species had been waiting for millions of years for another race to develop quantum technology. Earth's position in the galactic community had evolved from that of a primitive species facing extinction to a civilization that other races sought as protectors and allies. The quantum weapons ensured that humanity could never again be threatened by conventional military force, while the artifacts' peaceful applications offered benefits that even former enemies found impossible to resist. Fleet Admiral Sullivan stood in the observation deck of the Revolution, looking out at stars that no longer seemed distant or hostile, but filled with possibilities that human imagination was only beginning to explore. The galaxy had wondered why humanity sent one ship to face an armada, and the answer had changed everything about how the universe understood the relationship between technology and the fundamental nature of reality itself. The ancient artifacts hummed quietly in their chambers throughout the human fleet, while quantum fields maintained protective barriers around Earth and its growing network of colonies. Humanity had inherited the legacy of ancestors who transcended physics and used that inheritance to ensure that no species would ever again face the choice between submission and extinction when dealing with civilizations that believed superior firepower granted them the right to rule the galaxy.